The first gunshot tore through the morning like a scream. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. Ethan Cole didn't flinch, standing in the middle of Dry Creek's main street. Boots planted in the dust, he stared down the line of riders. Approaching from the east, 10 of them, faces shadowed by wide brims, rifles resting easy in their hands. The sun was still low, but its light caught the steel of their weapons, turning them into shards of fire that the wind carried the smell of sagebrush and gunpowder. Somewhere behind him, a shutter slammed shut. The townsfolk knew better than to linger. This wasn't their fight. It was his. Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the Colt at his hip, the familiar pull of the leather holster against his thigh. His heartbeat was steady, but his chest burned with something deeper than fear, a slow, simmering rage that had been building for weeks. They had taken his land, burned his barn, left his horse bleeding in the dirt. And when that wasn't enough, they'd come for the people who depended on him, the ranch hands, the widowed neighbor, the boy who worked the stables for a few coins a week. The Blackthorn gang didn't just want to ruin him, they wanted to erase him. The leader rode at the front, a man named Silas Blackthorn, tall, lean, with eyes like cold iron and a smile that never reached them. His coat was black as midnight, dust swirling around its hem. He reined in his horse 20 paces from Ethan, the animal's breath steaming in the cool air. "Well," Silas drawled, his voice carrying easily in the stillness, "look who's got the guts to stand in the open." Ethan didn't answer. Words were wasted on men like Silas. Instead, he let his gaze sweep over the rest of the gang. Scarred faces, twitching fingers, the restless shifting of boots in stirrups. They were ready to kill, but so was he. Silas tilted his head. "You've been a thorn in my side, Cole. Thought you'd take your beating and crawl away. But here you are, still breathing." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "That's the thing about breathing, Silas. You don't appreciate it until someone tries to take it from you." A ripple of laughter moved through the gang, but it was thin, uneasy. They'd heard the stories about the time Ethan faced down 3 armed men in a saloon and walked out without a scratch. About the cattle rustlers who never made it past his fence line. He wasn't just another rancher. He was a man who fought like the land itself, stubborn, unyielding, and impossible to tame. Silas's smile faded. "Last chance, Cole. Leave Dry Creek, leave the valley, or we bury you right here." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You'll have to try." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that makes the air feel thick in your lungs. Then, without warning, one of the riders jerked his rifle up. Ethan moved first. The Colt cleared leather in a blur, the crack of the shot echoing off the buildings. The rider pitched backward, his rifle clattering to the ground. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, and the street filled with the thunder of gunfire. Ethan dove behind a water trough, splinters flying as bullets chewed into the wood. He returned fire, each shot deliberate, each one finding its mark. The smell of smoke and blood mingled in the air, acrid and sharp. A bullet grazed his shoulder, hot pain lancing through him, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. He could feel the grit of the street under his palms, the sting of dust in his eyes. Every sense was alive, sharpened by the knowledge that one mistake meant death. Through the haze, he saw Silas dismount, moving with the slow confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Their eyes locked. Across the chaos, Ethan felt the world narrow to that single point, the man who had taken everything from him. He rose from cover, firing twice. One shot dropped a rider who'd been circling to flank him. The other forced Silas to dive behind a wagon. The gang's formation broke, their advantage slipping away. Ethan advanced, boots crunching in the dirt, his breath ragged but controlled. He could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat, the distant wail of someone crying inside a nearby building. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning. Silas popped up from behind the wagon, firing. The bullet tore through Ethan's hat, sending it spinning into the dust. Ethan didn't flinch. He fired back, the shot slamming into the wagon's wheel, splintering it. The wagon lurched, collapsing to one side, forcing Silas into the open. For a heartbeat, they stood facing each other, guns raised, the world holding its breath. Ethan spoke first. "This is for every man you've left in the dirt." He fired. Silas staggered, the gun slipping from his hand. He fell to his knees, eyes wide with shock, before collapsing face first into the dust. The remaining riders hesitated, then turned their horses and fled, the sound of their retreat fading into the distance. The street was silent again, save for the whisper of the wind. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He holstered his Colt, the leather creaking softly. Round him, doors creaked open, cautious faces peering out. No one spoke, but their eyes said enough: gratitude, relief, and something else, respect. He didn't smile. Victory in the West was never clean, but it was his dot, and as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning chill, Ethan Cole knew this was only the beginning. The bodies were still cooling when the first whispers began. Ethan Cole stood in the middle of Dry Creek's Main Street, the dust settling around him like the last breath of a dying storm. The sun had climbed higher, spilling gold over the rooftops, but it felt cold on his skin. Victory was supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground could give way at any second. He could hear the townsfolk emerging from their hiding places, the creak of doors, the shuffle of boots on wooden porches, the low murmur of voices. They looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear, as if unsure whether he was their savior or the next storm to roll through. A boy no older than 12 darted forward, his eyes wide. "Mr. Cole, you really killed Silas Blackthorne?" Ethan's gaze softened. "He gave me no choice." The boy nodded, but his hands fidgeted. "Pa says the Blackthorns got cousins, mean ones. They'll come for you." Ethan crouched, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then I'll be ready." The boy's eyes shone with something Ethan recognized: hope. It was a dangerous thing in the West. Hope could get you killed, but it was also the only thing worth fighting for. By noon, the street was clear. The dead had been carried away. The wounded tended to. Ethan's shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he ignored it. Pain was just another reminder that he was still alive. He walked to the edge of town, where the land stretched out in rolling hills and dry grass, the horizon shimmering in the heat. His ranch lay beyond that horizon, or what was left of it. The barn was a blackened skeleton, the fences splintered, the fields trampled. He could still smell the smoke if he closed his eyes. He thought of the night it happened, the orange glow on the horizon, the frantic pounding of hooves, the shouts and laughter of men who destroyed for sport. He'd been too far away to stop them. By the time he returned, it was over. The fire had eaten everything. That night had carved something into him, a promise. The sound of hoof beats pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see a rider approaching, a woman tall in the saddle, her dark hair tied back, a rifle slung across her back. She rode with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle herself. She reined in a few feet away. "Ethan Cole, that's me. Name's Mara Vance. I heard what happened this morning." Ethan studied her. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. And I'm here to tell you Silas wasn't the worst of them. His brother, Caleb, runs the rest of the Blackthorn outfit. He's meaner, smarter, and he's not going to take kindly to you killing his kin." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let him come." Mara shook her head. "You don't get it. Caleb doesn't just come. He plans. He waits. And when he strikes, he makes sure you wish you died quick." Ethan met her gaze. "Then I'll make sure he doesn't get the chance." She studied him for a long moment, then swung down from her horse. "You're gonna need help." They spent the afternoon in the saloon, maps spread across a table, the smell of whiskey and wood smoke hanging in the air. Mara knew the Blackthorn territory, the canyons they used to hide stolen cattle, the dry riverbeds they used as trails, the abandoned mine where they stored supplies. "They'll come from the south," she said, tracing a finger along the map. "Less open ground, more cover." Ethan nodded. "Then we make them think we're waiting in the north." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You're planning to draw them into a trap. That's the idea." She leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I like the way you think." Night fell heavy over Dry Creek. The town was quiet, but Ethan could feel the tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. He stood on the porch of the saloon, watching the stars emerge one by one. The wind carried the scent of rain, though the sky was clear. Mara joined him, a bottle in her hand. She offered it, and he took a swig, the burn of the whiskey warming his chest. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "But leaving doesn't change what's wrong. It just means someone else has to face it." She studied him in the dim light. "You're not like most men out here." Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's what they tell me." Somewhere in the darkness beyond the hills, a coyote howled. Ethan's hand drifted to the Colt at his side. He knew the sound wasn't a warning, not in the way people thought, but it still made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Because in the West, danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it came silent, like the wind, and Ethan Cole was ready to meet it head-on. The first sign came with the wind. It shifted just after dawn, rolling in from the south, carrying the faint scent of horses and campfire smoke. Ethan Cole stood on the ridge above Dry Creek, his eyes scanning the horizon. The land stretched out, in muted golds and browns, the early light catching on the jagged rocks and dry grass. Somewhere out there, Caleb Blackthorne was coming. Mara Vance joined him, her rifle slung across her back, a pair of binoculars in her hands. She raised them, scanning the southern flats. "Dust cloud," she said quietly. "Big one." Ethan didn't need to look. He could feel it, the way the air seemed to tighten, the way the birds had gone silent. Trouble was riding in. "How many?" he asked. "Hard to say. More than a dozen, maybe 20. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Good. Let them think numbers will save them." They'd spent the last 2 days preparing. Mara had helped him set the trap. False barricades in the north, visible from a distance, meant to draw Caleb's men into thinking the town's defense was concentrated there. Meanwhile, the real fight would happen here, in the narrow cut between two ridges south of town. Ethan had chosen the spot carefully. The ground funneled riders into a choke point, with high rocks on either side, perfect for an ambush. By mid-morning, the townsfolk who'd agreed to help were in position, a handful of ranch hands with rifles, the blacksmith with his old shotgun, even the stable boy with a borrowed pistol. They were nervous, but they trusted Ethan. That trust was a weight he carried like iron on his shoulders. Mara crouched beside him behind a boulder. "You sure about this?" Ethan's eyes stayed on the horizon. "No, but I'm sure about one thing. If we don't stop them here, they'll burn Dry Creek to the ground." The dust cloud grew, resolving into riders. Caleb Blackthorne rode at the front, his coat a deep brown, his hat pulled low. He was broader than Silas, with a beard that made his scowl even darker. His men fanned out behind him, rifles glinting in the sun. They slowed as they approached the cut. Wary, Caleb raised a hand, and the column halted. He scanned the ridges, his eyes sharp. Ethan could almost feel the man's mind working, weighing the risk. Then Caleb smiled, a slow, cold thing, and spurred his horse forward. Ethan waited until the first riders were deep in the choke point. "Now," he said. The ridges erupted with gunfire. The first volley dropped 3 riders instantly, their horses screaming as they bolted. The rest scrambled for cover, but there was none, just open ground and the walls of the cut. Mara's rifle cracked beside Ethan, each shot precise, deliberate. Caleb's voice roared over the chaos. "Push through. Don't stop." Ethan rose from behind the boulder, firing into the massive riders. The Colt bucked in his hand, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. A bullet whined past his ear, close enough to feel the heat of it. The Blackthorne men tried to charge, but the narrow ground slowed them. Horses collided, men cursed, and the second volley from the ridges cut them down again. Caleb dismounted, using his horse's cover. His rifle barked, and one of the ranch hands on the ridge cried out, tumbling backward. Caleb moved like a man who'd been in more fights than he could count, fast, ruthless, and unshaken by the chaos. Ethan's eyes locked on him. This was the man who'd sent Silas to destroy his life. This was the man who thought fear could rule a valley. Ethan broke from cover, moving down into the cut. Bullets kicked up dust around him, but he kept going, his focus narrowing until there was only Caleb. Caleb saw him coming and grinned. "Cole, I was hoping you'd be fool enough to show yourself." Ethan didn't answer. He fired, forcing Caleb to duck behind his horse. Caleb's return shot grazed Ethan's arm, hot pain flaring. but Ethan kept advancing. They met in the center of the cut, the world around them a blur of shouting and gunfire. Caleb swung his rifle like a club, catching Ethan across the ribs. The impact stole his breath, but he drove forward, slamming his shoulder into Caleb and knocking him back. The rifle clattered to the ground. Caleb drew a knife, the blade catching the sunlight. "I'm gonna carve that smug look off your face." Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing Caleb's wrist. They struggled, boots grinding in the dirt, the knife inching closer to Ethan's throat. Caleb was strong, but rage gave Ethan an edge. He twisted hard, the knife slipping free. It fell to the ground between them. They both went for it. Ethan's hand closed on the hilt first. He rose, driving the blade into the dirt beside Caleb's head, close enough to make the man flinch. "This is for my land," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "For my people." He swung instead with his fist, catching Caleb across the jaw. The man went down hard, the fight leaving him in a rush. The remaining Blackthorn men saw their leader fall and broke. Some fled back the way they'd come, others dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The gunfire faded, replaced by the ragged breathing of the victors. Mara appeared at Ethan's side, her rifle still in hand. "You all right?" Ethan nodded, though his ribs ached and his arm burned. "It's done." She glanced at Caleb, unconscious in the dirt. "What do you want to do with him?" Ethan looked down at the man, then out at the horizon. "Let the law have him, if they can hold him." As the townsfolk gathered, relief in their eyes, Ethan felt the weight on his shoulders ease, but only a little. In the west, peace was never permanent. There was always another storm on the horizon. But for now, Dry Creek was safe, and Ethan Cole had kept his promise. The morning after the fight, Dry Creek woke to a silence so deep it felt unnatural. No hoofbeats, no shouting, no gunfire. Just the slow creak of wooden signs in the breeze, and the faint rustle of tumbleweed rolling down the empty street. Ethan Cole stood outside the jailhouse, leaning against the post, watching the sun climb over the rooftops. His ribs ached with every breath. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him. But he was still standing. That counted for something. Inside, Caleb Blackthorn sat in a cell, his hands bound, his eyes burning with a cold, unbroken hatred. The lawman from the next county was due to arrive by sundown to take him away. Ethan didn't trust the law to hold him. Men like Caleb had a way of slipping through cracks. But for now, the town was safe, or at least safer than it had been. Yesterday, Mara Vance approached from across the street, her hat pulled low against the glare. She carried tin mugs of coffee, steam curling into the cool morning air. "You look like you've been standing here all night," she said, handing him one. Ethan took it, the bitter heat grounding him. "Didn't sleep much. Thinking about him." She nodded toward the jailhouse. "Thinking about what comes next," Ethan said. "Men like Caleb don't ride alone. Even if the rest's scattered, some will come looking." Mara sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning the street. "Then we make sure they find nothing worth taking." By mid-morning, the town was stirring. The blacksmith hammered at his forge again. The saloon keeper swept the porch, and the stable boy led a pair of horses to water. Life was creeping back. In cautious but determined. Ethan walked the length of the street, stopping to speak with folks, checking on the wounded. He found old Tom Weaver sitting outside the general store, his arm in a sling. "You did good yesterday, Cole," Tom said. "But you stirred up a hornet's nest." Ethan nodded. "Better to stir it here than let it crawl into our homes." Tom's eyes softened. "You're a stubborn man, only when it matters." That afternoon, Ethan and Mara rode out to his ranch. The land was quiet, the charred remains of the barn standing like blackened ribs against the sky. The smell of ash still lingered, faint but sharp. Ethan dismounted, walking slowly through the wreckage. His boots crunched on brittle wood. He crouched, picking up a half-burned horseshoe, turning it over in his hand. "This was my father's place," he said quietly. "He built it from nothing. Every fence post, every beam. He set them himself." Mara stood beside him, her voice low. "You can rebuild." Ethan looked at her, the weight of the past, and the fight still heavy in his eyes. "I will. But not just the barn, the whole valley. I'm done letting men like the Blackthorns decide who gets to live in peace They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could: tools half buried in ash, a few unburned planks, a saddle that had somehow survived. The work was slow, but it was something, and in the West, something was always better than nothing. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson, they sat on the fence line, watching the light fade. "You ever think about leaving?" Mara asked again. Ethan shook his head. "This land's in my blood. I leave, I lose more than dirt and timber. I lose who I am." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I guess I'm staying too." Back in town, the lawman arrived just after dark, a tall, weathered man named Sheriff Alden. He took Caleb without ceremony, shackling him and leading him to a waiting wagon. Caleb didn't resist, but his eyes never left Ethan, the saint. "Over, Cole," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "You can't kill every blackthorn." Ethan stepped closer, his voice just as calm. "Don't need to. Just need to make sure they know what happens when they come here." Caleb's smile was thin, humorless. "We'll see." The wagon rolled out into the night, the sound of its wheels fading into the distance. Later, Ethan stood alone on the porch of the saloon, the town quiet around him. The stars were sharp above, the air cool against his skin. He could feel the weight of the day settling into his bones. Mara joined him, leaning on the railing. "You think he's right, that it's not over?" Ethan didn't look at her. "In the West, it's never over. But that's all right. I'm not done either." They stood in silence for a while, the wind carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off. It was a good smell, clean, promising. For the first time in a long while, Ethan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, the valley could be more than a battleground. The rain came 2 days after Caleb Blackthorn was taken away. It wasn't much, just a thin, steady drizzle that darkened the dust and made the air smell of wet earth. But in Dry Creek, rain was a promise that the land could heal, that the scorched earth of Ethan Cole's ranch might one day bloom again. Ethan stood at the edge of his property, hat pulled low, watching the drops bead and run down the blackened beams of the barn's remains. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a weight. Every drop seemed to whisper, "Start again." Behind him, Mara Vance was unloading supplies from her horse: nails, planks, a coil of rope. "If we work fast, we can get a roof on the bunkhouse before the next storm," she said. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "You planning on staying that long?" She smirked. "I told you. I'm not leaving until I'm sure you won't get yourself killed." By midday, the rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clean. They worked side by side, the rhythmic thud of the hammer and the creak of wood filling the silence. Every so often, Ethan would catch Mara watching the horizon, her eyes narrowing. "You expecting someone?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "But I've been in enough fights to know the quiet never lasts." Ethan didn't argue. He'd been feeling it too, that subtle shift in the air, the way the wind seemed to carry something more than just dust. Trouble had a way of announcing itself without words. That evening, they rode into town for supplies. The saloon was busier than usual, the low hum of conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. But when Ethan and Mara stepped inside, the noise dipped. Just for a moment, people still weren't sure what to make of him, the man who'd stood in the street and faced down the blackthorns. Some saw a hero, others saw a magnet for trouble. At the bar, the saloon keeper, a weary man named Harris, poured them each a drink. "You hear the news?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "Caleb never made it to the county jail," Harris said, his voice low. "Wagon was found empty on the road. Sheriff Alden's men are dead." Mara's hand tightened on her glass. "When?" "Yesterday morning. Word is, someone ambushed them in the canyon." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Blackthorn men?" Harris shrugged. Could be someone else who wanted him free. Either way, he's out there." They left the saloon without finishing their drinks. Outside, the night air was cool, the moon casting long shadows across the street. Mara broke the silence first. "If Caleb's free, he's not going to wait long." Ethan nodded. "Then neither will we." The next morning, they rode south, following the old cattle trail that wound through the hills. The land here was rough, Jagged rocks, dry creek beds, and gullies deep enough to swallow a horse. It was the kind of country where a man could disappear. By midday, they found signs, hoofprints in the dust, a half-burned campfire, the faint smell of tobacco. Mara crouched, running her fingers over the tracks. For riders, she said. One of them's heavy in the saddle. Could be Caleb. Ethan scanned the ridges. They're moving fast. Then we moved faster. They pushed hard, the sun beating down, the wind carrying the scent of sage. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow pass between the cliffs. The ground here was littered with stones, the air still. Ethan reined in. This is wrong. Mara's eyes flicked to the ridges. Ambush. Before he could answer, a rifle cracked. The shot hit the dirt near his horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing. More gunfire followed. Echoing off the cliffs, Ethan and Mara dove for cover behind a boulder. Bullets sparking off the rock. Voices shouted from above, rough, mocking. Cole. The voice was Caleb's, carrying easily in the still air. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Ethan's grip tightened on his Colt. I'll fix that mistake. The fight was brutal. Caleb's men had the high ground, but Ethan and Mara were quick, using the rocks for cover, returning fire with precision. Dust and gunpowder filled the air, the sound of gunfire rolling through the pass like thunder. At one point, a bullet grazed Mara's cheek, leaving a thin line of blood. She didn't flinch, just reloaded and kept firing. Ethan spotted Caleb on the ridge, rifle in hand. His face twisted in a grin. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, the noise of the fight seemed to fade. This wasn't over. Not here, not yet. As the sun dipped low, the gunfire slowed. Caleb's men began to pull back, melting into the rocks and shadows. Within minutes, the pass was silent again, save for the wind. Mara leaned against the boulder, breathing hard. They could have finished it. Why didn't they? Ethan holstered his Colt. Because Caleb doesn't want me dead yet. He wants me to know he's coming. She met his gaze. Then we make sure we're ready. Ethan looked out at the darkening horizon. The rain had been a promise, but the shadows creeping over the land were a warning, and in the west, warnings were never to be ignored. The attack came at night, not the kind of night that hides you in shadows. This one was silver bright, the moon hanging low and full, painting the valley in cold light. The wind was restless, rattling the shutters of Dry Creek, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke from somewhere far off. Ethan Cole was awake before the first shot. He'd been sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, rifle across his knees, eyes on the dark line of hills to the south. Mara had warned him, Caleb won't come straight. He'll come when you're tired, when you think you've got time. The shot cracked through the stillness, followed by the distant thunder of hooves. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, shouting toward the main street. Up, everyone up. They're here. Within moments, the town was alive with movement, boots pounding on wooden porches, the metallic click of rifles being loaded, the low, urgent voices of men and women taking their positions. Mara appeared at his side, her hair loose from its tie, eyes sharp even in the half-light. How many? She asked. Ethan's gaze swept the hills. Too many to count. The first riders burst into view, dark shapes against the pale dust, their horses foaming at the bit. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing the night. Bullets tore into the wooden facades of the saloon and general store, splinters flying. Ethan and Mara took cover behind a water trough, returning fire. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the sharp tang of fear. Somewhere down the street, a lantern shattered, spilling fire across the dirt. Caleb's voice rose above the chaos, cold and clear. Cole, you think you can take my brother and walk away? Tonight, I take everything from you. The fight was a blur of sound and motion. Ethan moved from cover to cover, firing, reloading, shouting orders. Mara was a shadow at his side, her rifle steady, her shots deliberate. The townsfolk fought hard, but Caleb's men were relentless, sweeping in from both ends of the street. A bullet slammed into the trough beside Ethan, spraying him with water. He ducked, heart hammering, then popped up to fire again. One of Caleb's riders went down, his horse screaming as it bolted through the chaos. Ethan spotted Caleb, broad-shouldered, coat flaring as he rode straight down the center of the street. a pistol in each hand. Their eyes met, and the noise of the fight seemed to fade for a heartbeat. Ethan stepped out from cover, raising his rifle. Caleb fired first, the bullet grazing Ethan's side. Hot pain blooming, Ethan gritted his teeth and squeezed the trigger. The shot hit Caleb's shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. He clung to the reins, snarling, and wheeled his horse away. The gang faltered without their leader driving them forward. Mara shouted, rallying the townsfolk. Push them back, drive them out. The tide turned. One by one, Caleb's men broke. Retreating into the night, the sound of hooves faded, leaving only the ragged breathing of the defenders and the crackle of the small fires still burning. Ethan leaned against the trough, blood seeping through his shirt. Mara was at his side in an instant, pressing a hand to the wound. "You're lucky," she said, her voice tight. "Another inch and you'd be done." Ethan managed a faint smile. "Guess luck's still on my side." They walked the street together, checking on the wounded, stamping out the last of the fires. The damage was bad, shattered windows, bullet-pocked walls, but the town still stood. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Ethan looked south, toward the hills. Caleb was still out there, hurt, but alive. Mara followed his gaze. "He'll come again," Ethan nodded, "and I'll be here." The wolf had come down from the hills and been driven back. But in the west, wolves didn't give up. They circled, they waited, and they struck again. Ethan Cole knew the fight for Dry Creek wasn't over, but neither was he. The hills were quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. Ethan Cole rode at a steady pace, the leather creaking under him, the colt heavy at his hip. The moon was a thin silver blade above, cutting the darkness into sharp edges. Somewhere ahead, Caleb Blackthorne was waiting, not hiding, waiting. That was worse. Mara Vance rode beside him, her rifle across her lap. She hadn't said much since they left Dry Creek at dusk, but Ethan could feel her eyes on him, measuring the weight he carried. "You sure about this?" she asked finally. Ethan's gaze stayed on the trail. "If I don't end it tonight, he will." They'd tracked Caleb since the attack, following the trail of hoofprints, the occasional campfire ash, the faint smell of tobacco that seemed to cling to the wind. It led them into the high country, where the rocks rose like jagged teeth and the shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking. By midnight, they reached a narrow canyon. The walls loomed high on either side, the ground littered with loose stone. Ethan reined in, scanning the ridges. "He's here," he said. Mara's hand tightened on her rifle. "Then let's finish it." The first shot came from above, sparking, off the rock near Ethan's boot. He swung down from the saddle, pulling Mara with him, and they dove for cover behind a boulder. Caleb's voice echoed through the canyon, low and mocking. "Cole, you've been chasing me like a hound after a wolf, but you're in my ground now." Ethan's reply was steady. "Then I'll bury you in it." Gunfire erupted, the sound ricocheting off the canyon walls. Muzzle flashes lit the ridges, brief bursts of light in the dark. Ethan returned fire, each shot deliberate, forcing Caleb's men to keep their heads down. Mara moved like a shadow, shifting positions, her rifle cracking with deadly precision. One by one, the shapes on the ridges fell silent. Then it was just Caleb. The outlaw stepped into the moonlight at the far end of the canyon, his coat torn, his shoulders still bandaged from their last fight. His pistol hung loose in his hand, but his eyes were sharp. "You could have walked away, Cole," he said. "Could have gone back to your little patch of dirt and pretended none of this happened." Ethan stepped out from cover, closing the distance. "You came from my land, my people. You don't get to walk away from that." Caleb's smile was thin. "Then let's see who walks away tonight." They moved in a slow circle, boots crunching on the gravel, the canyon holding its breath. The moonlight caught the steel of their guns, the tension stretched so tight it felt like the air might snap. Caleb fired first. Ethan's body moved before his mind caught up, the bullet tearing past his side. He returned fire, the shot grazing Caleb's arm. They closed the distance, shots ringing out, the smell of gunpowder thick. Caleb lunged, slamming into Ethan, and they went down hard, the guns knocked from their hands. The fight turned brutal, fists, elbows, the scrape of boots on stone. Caleb was strong, but Ethan fought with something deeper than strength. Every Blow carried the weight of his burned barn, the faces of the people who'd trusted him, the promise he'd made to himself. Caleb swung wild, and Ethan caught his arm, twisting hard. The outlaw went to his knees, gasping. Ethan grabbed his Colt from the dirt, pressing the barrel to Caleb's chest. For a long moment, neither moved. The canyon was silent but for their breathing. "You gonna do it?" Caleb asked, his voice low. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped. "No, you don't get the easy way out." He stepped back, keeping the gun trained. "You're going to stand trial, and you're going to live with the fact that you lost." Caleb's eyes burned, but he didn't move as Mara stepped in, binding his hands. They rode back to Dry Creek with the first light of dawn spilling over the hills. The town was waiting, faces tense until they saw Caleb bound in the saddle. Ethan swung down, handing the outlaw over to the sheriff. "This time," he said, "make sure the cell holds." That night, the saloon was full, not with fear, but with laughter. The air was warm, the lantern light soft. Mara sat across from Ethan, a faint smile on her lips. "You could have killed him," she said. Ethan nodded. "But then I'd be no better than him." She studied him for a moment, then raised her glass. "To Dry Creek." Ethan clinked his glass against hers. "To peace, for as long as it lasts, outside." The wind moved through the valley, carrying the scent of rain, for the first time in a long while. Ethan Cole let himself breathe easy. The wolf was gone. For now. The valley sounded different now, but not entirely at ease. The windmill still creaked in the breeze, cattle lowed in the distance, and the hammering of fresh nails rang from the barn. Yet beneath it all was something quieter, heavier, like the land itself was listening. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of his half-rebuilt barn, the scent of fresh timber mixing with the faint sweetness of wild sage. Sweat darkened his shirt, but he welcomed it. Sweat meant progress. Sweat meant the valley was still his to fight for. On the roof, Mara Vance drove nails with steady precision. She paused, glancing down at him. "You're staring again," she said. Ethan smirked. "Making sure you're not about to fall." She grinned. "If I fall, it'll be because you distracted me." It had been 3 weeks since Caleb Blackthorne was taken away, shackled, guarded, sent far from the valley. The sheriff swore this time the cell would hold, but Ethan knew better than to believe in forever out here. The West had a way of spitting men back into the world. The townsfolk had changed too. The blacksmith's shutters were repaired, the saloon had a fresh coat of paint, and even the stable boy walked with his head higher. But there was a watchfulness in their eyes, as if they knew peace was only a pause between storms. One evening, Harris the saloon keeper poured Ethan a drink on the house. "You gave us more than a fight, Cole," he said. "You gave us a reason to believe we could win." Ethan only nodded. He didn't fight for thanks. He fought because it was the only way he knew to keep what mattered safe. The days found their rhythm. Mornings on the ranch, afternoons in town, evenings on the porch with Mara, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Sometimes they spoke of the future. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. One night, as the crickets sang, Mara asked, "You ever think about leaving?" Back when Silas first came, Ethan thought for a moment. "I'd have land somewhere else, maybe peace. But it wouldn't be this land, wouldn't be these people. And I'd always wonder if I'd run from something worth fighting for." Mara's gaze lingered. "You didn't run. That matters." The valley's scars were still there. Blackened patches where grass refused to grow. Bullet holes in the saloon sign. Fresh graves on the hill. But scars meant survival. And survival meant the fight wasn't over. One afternoon, Ethan rode to the far ridge. From there, the whole valley lay before him. The silver thread of the creek. The patchwork of fields. The faint smoke from town. The wind tugged at his hat, carrying the scent of rain from the west. And something else. Something faint, metallic, like the echo of a far-off gunshot. He narrowed his eyes toward the horizon. That night, the rain came, steady, soaking, drumming on the barn roof. Ethan and Mara stood in the doorway, watching the water run in silver streams across the yard. "Good for the grass," Mara said. "Good for the soul," Ethan replied. But his gaze kept drifting toward the dark hills. Somewhere out there, the land was holding its breath, and Ethan knew, when it exhaled, it might bring trouble with it. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the air still carried its weight, heavy, damp, and restless. Ethan Cole saddled his horse in silence. The leather darkened from the night's downpour. The barn smelled of wet hay and fresh timber, but beneath, it was something else, a faint, acrid scent that didn't belong. Smoke. Not the sweet, clean smoke of a hearth fire. This was sharper, meaner, the kind that clung to your clothes after a building burned. Mara appeared in the doorway, her hair still damp from the rain. "You smell it too," she said. Ethan nodded. "Where?" She tilted her head toward the south ridge. "Winds carrying it from the canyon." They rode out without breakfast, the horses' hooves sinking into the softened earth. The valley was quiet, but not in the way it had been the past few weeks. This was a listening quiet, the kind that made every creak of saddle leather sound too loud. Halfway to the ridge, they found the first sign, a charred fence post, still warm to the touch. Beyond it, the grass was blackened in a wide arc, as if someone had set a fire and let it run wild before the rain put it out. Mara crouched, running her fingers over the scorched earth. This wasn't an accident. Ethan scanned the horizon. No, this was a message. By midday, they reached the canyon mouth. The air here was thicker, the smell of smoke stronger. A few vultures circled overhead, their shadows sliding across the rocks. Ethan dismounted, leading his horse into the narrow pass. The ground was littered with hoofprints, fresh ones, pressed deep into the damp soil. At least 6 riders, maybe more. Mara's voice was low. Could be Caleb's men. Ethan's jaw tightened. Or someone worse. They followed the trail deeper into the canyon until they came to a bend, where the walls closed in tight. That's where they saw it. A crude totem made from twisted barbed wire and a splintered rifle stock, planted in the ground like a warning. A strip of black cloth fluttered from it, soaked through with rain. Mara's eyes narrowed. "That's not Blackthorn's mark." Ethan studied it, the muscles in his jaw working. "No, this is new." The ride back to Dry Creek was faster. The horses lathered with sweat by the time they reached the outskirts. The town looked the same. Children playing in the street, the blacksmith at his forge. But Ethan felt the shift, the peace they'd been holding onto was already cracking. That night, as the lanterns burned low in the saloon, Harris leaned across the bar. "You hear the talk? Couple of ranchers south of here say they've seen riders at night, faces covered. Don't speak, just watch." Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. "How long?" "Past week or so, since the rain started." Later, on the porch of the bunkhouse, Mara stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the dark hills. "Whoever they are, they're testing us." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure they don't like what they find." The wind shifted, carrying with it that faint, metallic tang again, like the echo of a far-off gunshot. Somewhere, out there, in the dark, the next fight was already saddling up. The first scream came from the north end of town. It was just past midnight. The moon was a pale coin behind thin clouds. The streets empty except for the occasional sway of a hanging lantern. Ethan Cole was halfway to the bunkhouse door when the sound cut through the stillness, sharp, panicked, and followed by the unmistakable crack of a rifle. Mara was already on the porch, rifle in hand. "North Street," she said, her voice low but urgent. They moved fast, boots pounding the dirt, the smell of smoke hitting them before they saw the flames. The blacksmith's shed was burning, fire licking up the walls in greedy orange tongues. Silhouetted against the glow were riders, 6, maybe 7, their faces hidden behind black scarves, their coats long and tattered. They didn't shout, didn't taunt. They just moved with cold precision. Ethan dropped to one knee, sighting down his Colt. The first shot took a rider clean out of the saddle. Mara's rifle cracked a heartbeat later, dropping another, but the rest didn't scatter like most gangs would. They wheeled their horses in unison, firing back with unnerving accuracy. A bullet tore through the post beside Ethan's head, splinters stinging his cheek. He ducked, moving toward the cover of a water trough. Mara slid in beside him, reloading with quick, practiced motions. "These aren't Blackthorn's men," she said. "They're too disciplined." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then who the hell are they?" The riders didn't linger. After a few more shots, they turned and vanished into the night, the sound of their hooves fading into the hills. The fire roared. Behind them, casting long, flickering shadows across the street. By the time the flames were beaten down, the blacksmith's shed was nothing but a smoking skeleton. The blacksmith himself stood in the ruins, his face pale, his hands shaking. "They didn't take anything," he said. "Didn't even try, just burned it." Ethan felt the weight of that. This wasn't a raid. It was a warning dot at dawn. Ethan and Mara rode out, following the trail the riders had left. The hoofprints were deep, the horses heavy with gear. They led north, toward the Badlands, a stretch of broken rock and dry gullies where the wind never seemed to stop. By midday, they found another sign, a dead steer, its hide marked with the same twisted barbed wire symbol they'd seen in the canyon. The carcass was fresh, the blood still dark in the dust. Mara's voice was tight. "They're marking territory." Ethan looked out over the empty land. "Then they're planning to take more than that." Back in Dry Creek, the townsfolk were restless. Harris pulled Ethan aside in the saloon. "You need to know something. Old man Rourke lives out past the North Ridge. Says he's seen them before. Years ago. Said they were called the Hollow Spurs. Never stayed in one place long. Never left survivors." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Why here?" Harris shook his head. "Maybe they think we're worth the trouble now." That night, Ethan stood on the ridge above town, the wind cold against his face. Below, the lanterns of Dry Creek glowed warm and fragile in the dark. Somewhere out there, in the black expanse beyond the hills, the Hollow Spurs were watching. Mara joined him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll come again." Ethan didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "Then we'll be ready." But deep down, he knew readiness might not be enough this time. The night was too still. Ethan Cole lay in bed, boots still on, hat tipped low over his eyes. He hadn't slept, not really, since the Hollow Spurs had shown themselves. Every creak of the bunkhouse boards, every shift of the wind felt like a warning. Then it came. Not a scream this time, not a single shot. A chorus of gunfire, erupting all at once from the north, east, and west. He was on his feet before the echoes faded, Colt in hand, heart pounding with the rhythm of the shots. Outside, the air was already thick with smoke. The smell of burning pitch hit him like a fist. Mara burst through the door, rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes sharp. "They're hitting from 3 sides." Ethan's mind was already moving. "They're not here to scare us this time. They're here to take the town." The street was chaos. Flames licked up the side of the general store, casting wild shadows that danced across the faces of the Hollow Spurs. They moved like wraiths, silent, masked, their black coats snapping in the wind. No drunken whoops, no shouted threats, just the cold efficiency of men who'd done this before. Ethan dropped behind a rain barrel, firing into the advancing line. One rider pitched forward, tumbling from the saddle. Mara's shot took another, the crack of her rifle cutting through the roar of the fire. But for every one they dropped, 2 more seemed to appear from the smoke. From the south end of town came the sound of splintering wood, the corral fence giving way. Ethan's stomach turned. "They're after the horses." Mara's jaw tightened. "If they take them, we're done." Ethan nodded once. "Then we hold the street, no matter what." The fight turned brutal. Bullets tore through shutters, glass shattered, and the air filled with the acrid tang of gunpowder. The townsfolk fought hard. The blacksmith with his shotgun, Harris firing from the saloon balcony. Even the stable boy crouched behind a trough with a borrowed pistol. But the Hollow Spurs were relentless. They moved in coordinated waves, forcing Ethan and the others to shift constantly, never letting them settle into a defense. Through the smoke, Ethan caught sight of a figure on a pale horse, taller than the rest, his coat lined with silver, stitching that caught the firelight, even at a distance. Ethan could feel the weight of the man's gaze. "That's him," Mara said, following his eyes. "Their leader." Ethan's grip tightened on his Colt. "Then this ends with him." He broke from cover, moving through the chaos, bullets whining past his ears. The leader saw him coming and didn't turn away. Instead, he raised a long-barreled revolver, the muzzle flashing in the firelight. The shot missed by inches, splintering. The post beside Ethan's head. Ethan returned fire, forcing the man to wheel his horse and vanish into the smoke. By the time the Spurs pulled back, the street was a ruin, buildings scorched, windows shattered, the dirt churned to mud by hooves and blood. They'd taken 3 horses, left 2 men dead, and burned half the general store. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, the taste of smoke in his mouth. Mara came to stand beside him, her face streaked with soot. "They'll be back," she said. Ethan nodded, eyes on the dark hills. "And next time, we take the fight to them." The sun was bleeding into the horizon, turning the sky into a blaze of gold and crimson. Ethan Cole sat astride his horse at the edge of the North Ridge, eyes fixed on the dust cloud rising in the distance. The Hollow Spurs were coming, all of them. No more probing attacks, no more warnings. This was the end. Mara Vance rode up beside him, her rifle resting across her saddle. "They'll hit us hard," she said. Ethan's voice was steady. "Then we hit harder." They rode back into Dry Creek together. The townsfolk were already in position, rifles in windows, barricades across the street. Buckets of water lined up in case the Spurs tried to burn them out again. The blacksmith stood at the center, shotgun in hand, his face grim. Even the stable boy was there, jaw set, pistol tucked into his belt. Ethan dismounted, walking the line, meeting each pair of eyes. "This is our home," he said. "They think they can take it because they've taken other towns, but they've never faced us. They've never faced you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the defenders. The air was tight, electric. The first riders appeared as the sun touched the hills, black silhouettes against the fire of the sky. At their head was the man on the pale horse, silver stitching on his coat catching the last light. He didn't slow, neither did his men. The street erupted in gunfire. The Hollow Spurs hit like a storm. Horses thundered through the barricades, bullets tore into wood and glass, and the air filled with the roar of battle. Ethan moved like a man possessed, firing, reloading, shouting orders. Mara was a shadow at his side, her rifle cracking with deadly precision. The Spurs fought with the same cold discipline as before, but this time Dry Creek didn't break. Every alley, every rooftop spat defiance. The townsfolk fought not just for survival, but for the right to stay. Through the chaos, Ethan saw the pale horse cutting a path toward him. The leader's revolver flashed, the shots close enough to feel the heat. Ethan dove behind a wagon, then came up firing. One shot grazed the man's arm, another shattered the revolver from his hand. They met in the center of the street, the noise of the fight fading into the background. The leader swung down from his horse, drawing a long knife. Ethan holstered his Colt. This wasn't going to end with a bullet. The fight was brutal, fists, elbows, the crunch of boots on dirt. The man was strong, but Ethan fought with something deeper, the memory of every fire, every grave, every face that had looked to him for protection. A final blow sent the leader sprawling into the dust. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving. "Dry Creek stands," he said, voice low but carrying. When the leader didn't rise, the Spurs faltered. One by one, they turned their horses and fled into the darkening hills. The street fell silent except for the crackle of a dying fire and the ragged breathing of the defenders. Mara came to stand beside Ethan, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes bright. "It's over," she said. Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the last light was fading. For now, that night, the town gathered in the saloon. There was laughter, relief, and the clink of glasses. But outside, on the porch, Ethan stood alone for a moment, watching the stars emerge. The West was never truly safe. There would always be another storm, another fight. But tonight, Dry Creek was alive, and as long as he drew breath, Ethan Cole would keep it that way.